Hi everybody, welcome back to Spooky Scary Storytime, the series where I share allegedly true listener stories, the ones that you think nobody else would believe because they're so wild, so creepy, so unbelievable. And today's story is all of those things. I would argue that this is one of the most intense stories that I have received to date. It came from a man who wanted to remain anonymous, and he claims that his ex and a man he just calls the rancher plan to basically lure him in, kidnap him, and eventually hunt him. There's a lot of details to this story, so in lieu of doing a compilation, which is what I normally do, the story is very involved, very detailed, and so I've decided to just tell it in what I feel is the most comprehensive way with some B-roll to add layers to it. I hope you enjoy. Here's that story. My ex and a man I call the rancher hatched a plot to kidnap me, take me to the desert, release me, and hunt me. This story came from a man who wanted to remain anonymous, and this is his story. I was dating a woman. Our relationship was solid. We never argued, never raised our voices, had a pretty normal sex life, and we got along great as far as I could tell. She was smart, had a PhD, though she didn't work a traditional job. To be honest, I wasn't sure how she paid her bills, and when I asked her what she did, she just told me she'd come into money early in life, so I assumed it was generational. She spent her free time crocheting and painting with watercolors. I liked her. I was working a travel position that required me to move once or twice a year when a new contract came up. That's how we found the ranch. It was odd how we came to find it. 2 work contracts abruptly fell apart, one canceled because of a manipulated schedule, and the other canceled just days before start. The third assignment finally stuck, but it was stationed in a very rural, sparsely populated region where housing was scarce. I did find a house to rent, though admittedly it was old and run down. My girlfriend at the time refused to live there because the walls were too thin. I fought her on it, insisting there were no alternatives. But one night after she left, the water heater nearly caught fire. I then found large boxes of matches that were oddly stashed in every room. I didn't suspect her then, but looking back, nothing about that moment feels like coincidence. She then sent me 2 versions of wants, needs, and negotiables lists for our new place. Both lists were nearly identical. The items were strangely specific, though, including mountain views from the property, a paddock, even though we didn't have horses, trails on the property, and a hot tub. She told me she'd pay up to $2,000 a month for her half, even though this was much more than she paid at her previous place, and I didn't know her to have a stable income, as I mentioned. I thought it was odd, but I was desperate for housing. She encouraged me to check Airbnb for long-term rentals. I didn't want to. I knew they'd be expensive, but with no options left, I looked. The first listing I saw matched every single detail from her list, and that's how I found the ranch. I toured the place alone. It sat on about 1,000 acres backed by national forest, utterly isolated. The kind of place where you could scream for help and no one would ever hear you. The man who owned it, the one I call the rancher, showed me around. Within minutes, he began hinting at an intense past. Training with Navy SEALs, halo jumps, flying anything he could fit in. He mentioned he owned 2 planes and a helicopter. I assumed he was ex-military and worked in the private aircraft sector. He didn't outright say he'd killed anyone, but the implication hung in the air. He mentioned he had 8 properties around the country, but that this was his primary residence. He also mentioned owning a 10,000-acre ranch outside of Buenos Aires, Argentina. I brushed it off as bragging. I had no idea what I was walking into, and we moved in a short time later. The rancher lived in his half of the cabin, and we had the other half with our own bathrooms and entrance. It turned out the rancher was also a cordon bleu trained chef, along with being an expert assassin, as I would find out, so we offered to cook us a meal as a welcome party the night after we moved in. There was one other person there, a woman, who was introduced as being friends with his girlfriend, who wasn't even in the same state at the time. It was evidence that she was not close friends with the rancher at all, but in hindsight, I believe was there to soften me up, as her and I connected heavily on music and concerts, and her presence just felt purposeful. After dinner, the rancher, who was in his mid-60s, mentioned that he had worked as an assassin by trade for many years. The crowd went quiet, and he quickly changed the subject. I mentioned earlier in the evening that I was a musician, so the rancher says, I have an acoustic guitar. Would you like to play it? I, of course, accepted the offer. He then offered me some very fine whiskey that he had mentioned earlier, to which I also accepted the seemingly gracious offer. I sat down in the living room to pluck around the guitar while he went to his side of the cabin, into his office to fetch the whiskey. My ex and the other lady at this time were in the kitchen, out of sight from where I was. The rancher comes back with a tumbler, with a single rock and a liberal pour of supposedly some extremely rare and expensive scotch. We cheersed. I took a sip. I don't remember what it tasted like, but reality shifted instantly. The cabin dissolved. Suddenly, I was sitting in a small metal room illuminated entirely in deep red. The rancher sat across from me, and he began verbally tearing me apart, describing insecurities I never voiced out loud, fears, shames, personal wounds no stranger should have known. He said things like, "Your mother never loved you. Your father thinks you're weak. You'll never be a man. You should kill yourself." It lasted 10 to 15 minutes, relentless. Then, as if blinking between two worlds, I was suddenly back in the cozy cabin, sitting exactly where I'd been. He walked into the kitchen without a word, acting like nothing had happened. I still don't know what happened. All I know is that I've never experienced anything like it before or since. When I gathered myself and re-entered the kitchen, he acted friendly and asked how the whiskey was. I don't want to make a scene because at that point I really had no idea what happened, and I thought there was a chance it was all in my head. The only other drink I had that night was a glass of wine with dinner. I can handle my booze, too. I'm a bigger guy from a Catholic family. It wasn't the alcohol that did that to me. That was mid-October. By Thanksgiving, I suspected my girlfriend was cheating with the rancher. I came home from work late one night, and the rancher had a buddy visiting who was out front. As I was walking in, he stepped in front of me and started chatting me up. He took almost too much of an interest in me, as if he was trying to stall me. I finally got inside, and my ex came out of the bathroom, fresh out of the shower. The rancher then came out of his side of the cabin in a towel, also freshly showered. It was odd. They both looked rushed and seemed to stammer over their words. They were both wide-eyed like I surprised them. I asked what was up. She told me they had all just been in the hot tub, but the rancher's buddy I was talking to outside was bone dry, so he clearly wasn't in there with them. Well, without going too much into detail, she and I started some foreplay shortly thereafter in our bedroom, and I went down on her, and it smelled like straight latex rubber. So much so that I stopped, and I flat out asked her if she had just been with the rancher before I got home. She laughed it off and said no, but I 100% believe she did. The other warning sign before I discovered the plot came a few months into living there. The rancher's ex-wife was over one day. I'd met her before as they remained friends. I had come home from work early one day and heard the two of them talking on the other side of the house. I guess they assumed I wasn't home, but my ears perked up when I heard them mention my name. The rancher said something like, "Oh, he's just a blank in this profession, and no one else is out here." No one would even be able to search that hard. I did not hear the rest of the conversation as they then went outside. While my ex and I were together living at the ranch, there was a cartel-related mass murder about 15 miles from us when they found 7 severed heads in an abandoned house. This was unrelated to where we lived, obviously, but I realized, given the seclusion of the ranch, that we should have a way to defend ourselves in case of a break-in. I bought a shotgun for self-defense, and I told her she needed to learn to shoot it. She had been, at this point, very vocally anti-gun. But we went outside, and I used a clay pigeon thrower to toss some clays for her to shoot at. The first round, she hit one. I teased her. Then she says, "Let me do another round." And she went 10 for 10, absolutely dusted each one. I only went 6 for 10, and I've been shooting since I was a kid. That scared me. Then she said she wanted to learn to shoot an AR-15. She says, "I know who can teach me." She wanted the rancher. So they did it when I was supposed to be sleeping, as I was on night shift at the time. Well, guns are loud, so I woke up when they started shooting, even though they were a good ways from the cabin. I poked my head out to see if I could see them, and I could. She was shooting at a small metal target and was just pinging the shit out of it, rapid firing with a good type grip and stance, like she knew what she was doing. The girl clearly had skills, though at the time I had no idea where she learned from. After 7 months of living there, by mid-April, my suspicions that my ex and the rancher were hooking up behind my back were at an all-time high. After catching a conversation between the two of them via the Alexa that made it sound like they had had a relationship going for quite some time, I called her out on it. Her behavior rapidly shifted. She began painting me as violent, unstable, dangerous. I had never raised my voice alone, let alone threatened her. Something felt off, and there was no coming back from that, so we broke up. One day, while she and the rancher were packing her things, I left a recording device in my tool bag. I hoped to catch her admitting she was lying to me. Instead, I heard something that made me flee the state and not stop driving until I was over 1,000 miles away. What I heard was them discussing kidnapping me, transporting me to the New Mexico desert, taking other victims that they had already abducted, releasing us at dusk, and hunting us at dawn with the rancher's ex-special ops friends, and afterwards, we'll bury them in the garden. My ex laughed, and the rancher replied, "There's nothing he can do. We'll lure him back out here." They continued the conversation casually until she revealed something I hadn't suspected. She mentioned a gun she had, a Makarov. He asked what happened to it. It surprised me in itself because she had said she had never shot a gun until I was teaching her. But she responded, "Remember when we did that job in this specific town?" It was the town where she lived when we first met. He says, "Oh yeah, I remember that job." And I realized at this moment that they had known each other long before we came to stay at the ranch, that she was the bait, that he was the hunter, and that I was the prey. Then I heard what sounded like a gagged person in the background. My ex responded, "Aw," and continued the conversation casually. That was the moment I realized I had to run. Of course, I couldn't let on that I knew everything they were planning. I went and got a U-Haul and came back to the ranch to grab my things. Now, there were 2 ranch hands that had come around. One I had gotten to know because he was around quite a bit. I'm a friendly and open person, so I talked to him quite a lot, and he ended up opening up to me about struggles he had with being estranged from his kids and a brain tumor he had removed that took away his ability to read and write at the age of almost 70. I sympathized with him and just listened. So when I got back to the ranch with my U-Haul that day, on which I don't believe I was meant to leave, he comes up to me right when I first pull up. I stepped out of the cab and he grabbed my arm, pulled me close, and kind of says quiet in my ear, "I thought you were supposed to have somebody else with you." I looked at him like, "Wait, what? Why?" And he just says, "You don't have anyone else to help you?" I just said no, but the look on his face was one of concern that clued me into something not being quite right, although I was already hypervigilant by this time due to knowing I was being set up for something bad to happen to me. Then the other ranch hand comes up to me, who I had only seen maybe twice in the 7 months I lived on the ranch, and he acts super buddy-buddy, saying, "Hey, what's up, brother?" as he gives me a handshake hug, and "How you doing, man? And we got most of your things out here for you already, and we put your gun safe and your other stuff out in the barn. Come get us when you're ready to load it up, and we'll help you." And this really bothered me, and so as soon as they walked away, I got to work hustling my ass off, just throwing things in the U-Haul, trying to get out of there as soon as possible. As I'm loading up, I realized a lot of my stuff wasn't out on the deck where they put everything else. Some things seemed to be hidden, like a knit blanket that I really liked was under the bed. My favorite coffee mug was in the back bottom drawer of a cabinet, and a Tempur-Pedic that I love was stuffed in the corner of the closet, almost as if to make it take me longer to find it all or something. I don't know how I found that stuff so quickly, but throughout the heat of this entire ordeal, I couldn't help feel guided, like God or some angel was protecting me and showing me the path out of there. So I got all my things out of the cabin and off the deck, and I drive back to the barn to get my gun safe and a couple of totes that had jackets and some ski gear in them. I certainly did not go to the ranch hands for help, and the adrenaline was pumping, so somehow I managed to grab everything in 2 brief trips from the barn to the U-Haul. I closed the back door, latched it, and didn't even bother with the lock. I hauled ass out of there, and that was when I saw the 2 ranch hands about 2 or 3 feet deep in a hole they were digging in the garden. The rancher called me not 5 minutes after I left, saying, "Oh shoot, I must have missed you. Well, I'd sure like to see you before you take off for good. Would you mind coming back here so I can tell you goodbye?" I just hung up the phone and turned it off. I moved into an apartment for a bit near my job and put things in storage. I was eventually able to get reassigned to another employment contract across the country, and when I got to my destination and finally felt like I could breathe a little, I opened up my gun safe to find my rifles had been tampered with. It could have caused an out-of-battery detonation had I not caused it, and there were clear tool marks that I certainly did not make. After I moved, my ex hacked my phone and had all of my personal passwords, debit cards, credit cards, personal information, and pictures that I had saved in a number of different files hidden on my phone, consolidated into one file that she had labeled "Oh Hun," which I assume because we called each other Hun and Honey. That file was created Christmas Day, during which I was with my family and definitely not messing with my phone. I also had to replace my cards several times because each time I changed them, they would still get fraudulent charges. This went on until I changed phones and phone numbers. And there's one more detail I feel important is to mention after leaving. The guy she dated before me, I never got his last name, but I knew his first and his profession. After all this madness went down, I got curious and I tried to look him up because there couldn't be too many people with his name in that line of work. Lo and behold, I found one match, and it turned out he had died at the top of a mountain the winter right before I met her, and he wasn't found until spring. The article I found said it was accidental and there were no signs of foul play, stating they believed he died of overexposure after getting trapped in a storm without proper gear. I'm kind of having a small panic attack reliving all of this, full disclosure. That was the most surreal and unfathomable series of events I could ever hope to never live through again. I wouldn't wish it on my enemies. The amount of stress and anxiety I was experiencing. My beard went from some gray but mostly dark brown to practically white within a week or two after leaving the ranch. It happened over 3 years ago now, and I still can't sleep through the night. I have significant PTSD from this as it happened in 2022, and I still fear they plan to find me and not leave me a loose end. I sleep with a shotgun at my feet and a 45 under my pillow every night and have to sleep on the couch because it's closest to the entrances so I can be sure I hear anyone trying to get in, as opposed to sleeping in my bedroom where I may not hear anything. There are, of course, more details to this story, but I drive myself crazy going over them all. I'm sharing this as a warning to people that live out that way, and just in general to not be too trusting of people who seem indifferent to the suffering of others, and they may openly discuss their dark thoughts, wishes, and desires. Interestingly enough, he sent me a follow-up email, and he sent me an article that is titled "Rich Sniper Tourist Allegedly Paid $90,000 to Shoot Civilians, Including Kids, During Human Safari Trips to Sarajevo, Wild Claims Allege." This article goes on to claim that the investigation was sparked after an Italian writer alleged that he had uncovered evidence that wealthy gun enthusiast, dubbed sniper tourists, would pay Bosnian Serb forces for the chance to gun down residents at random during the 4-year siege of the city, The Guardian reported. Now, the person who submitted his story to me did not say that he believed that the rancher was related to this article, but he does believe that this is the type of setup that he had. And he said he had reason to believe that the rancher setup was in Argentina on his 10,000-acre ranch, though he believes that the plot to hunt him personally was going to be in the northern desert of New Mexico, because that's what they had talked about on the recording. He says he does still have the recordings. He does not believe that they're still monitoring his phone, but he said he's not certain, and anything is possible with people like that. As always, thank you guys so much for listening, for being here. If you have a story, I would love to read it. You can submit your stories at dogoodstaybad.com. We don't judge, we just listen, and we're here to support you however we can. I feel like this is one of the best communities, if not the best community on the internet. So thank you guys so much for being part of it and for letting me do this and for letting me tell your stories. I will have another normally formatted episode coming this weekend, probably. Until then, I will talk to you guys soon.